Well, all right, my friends, let's get going. My name is David Parsons. This is Nostalgia Trap. I hope you are ready for a conversation all about Ron DeSantis, the Walt Disney Corporation, and the state of Florida, because that's what we've got for you this week. I am talking with my good friend Avi Garelick. He's someone you may know. He's been on the podcast a couple times over the years. We know him through the Urban Policy and Planning Department at Hunter College at the wonderful City University of New York. Avi knows a lot about housing and political economy, and he wrote a piece that sort of went viral over the last couple weeks as people were talking about Disney and DeSantis. It's in the Architect's newspaper. I will include this piece as a link in our episode description, but it sort of gets into this whole idea of the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which I don't think a lot of people know, the RCID. Disney's sort of tax shelter kingdom in Florida, and the weird politics of Ron DeSantis going after that. I know I've talked a lot about the history of Disney on this show, and especially for our subscribers on Patreon. So if you want to go check out the Patreon stuff on Disney, that gets more into my sort of take on that larger history. But what Avi and I wanted to talk about was Florida specifically. So he suggested I watch this film, The Florida Project, which I'd never seen, directed by Sean Baker. It came out in 2017. Really, really compelling film, and there was a lot to say about the film's connection to all the politics we describe here. So this is a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I want to thank Avi Garelick for coming on and being a good sport and talking about all this cultural stuff connected to the political economy. I feel like we touched on some really cool stuff here. So let us know what you think in the comments, etc. Go check out the Patreon page. We appreciate your support. The link is in the episode description. It's patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Enjoy this conversation. Here is me talking with Avi Garelick. Avi Garelick, good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, good to see you, David. Great to be here.
Thanks for being on Nostalgia Trap. I saw a piece that you wrote a few weeks back that was circulated around social media a lot. That's about Disney and Florida and DeSantis. So I wanted to talk with you about that because we've been talking about Disney and Disneyland and LA on the program for a while. And also we had Jason Vuick on last year, who's a historian who wrote a book, I think it's called The Swamp Peddlers. And we talked about Florida real estate and just the whole history of that state. It feels like Florida has been like my whole life has been like some sort of center for understanding like everything that's wrong with American culture and politics and economics. What got you started thinking about writing about Disney? Is it the DeSantis thing, right?
It was the DeSantis thing. Yeah, and I gotta say, I don't want to butter you up too much, but I did listen to your Disney series, what you got so far there.
Cool.
And it really, really opened my mind to the cultural and political significance of the whole project.
Nice.
In a way that I hadn't gotten to yet. Like it definitely got me thinking, because I didn't come into this as a Disney head. In fact, I have seen the Disney movies for the most part, but I've never been to Disney World or Disneyland. My mother was staunchly opposed. It's kind of
why that's a key to this whole conversation, I think. Why was your mother staunchly opposed to engaging with the Disney mythos?
Yeah, man. I mean, she's an anarchist hippie. So
there's the answer. Like, it's
yeah, that's all you need to know, really. Like, number one, we couldn't afford it, and number two, we wouldn't have gone even if we could.
Yeah.
She also taught me to be really suspicious of the Disney messages. Like she let us watch the movies, but she would also criticize them harshly. And she told us that Beauty and the Beast was, about an abusive relationship and all of that stuff, and criticizing the superficiality and the sexism. So actually, like when I think about the education that I received from my parents, it's often through hating stuff like Disney.
That's funny. to me, that's like it's pretty key because it seems like I mean, I grew up in a different way with a different attitude towards Disney for sure. I mean, I lived near Los Angeles. We went to Disneyland a couple times a year, maybe, or once a year. I mean, my parents would take us out of school so we could go on days when no one was there. Like we
Wow.
were, and it was Disney, like coming to terms with Disney as all the things that maybe your mom saw in it, the kind of like the evil side of Disney's ideology and all that kind of stuff. That came later for me. That was like a teenage college rebellion thing. But that's what's so interesting about what's going on in Florida right now, right? Is because it's sort of like, okay, if you're a good leftist or a socialist, or if you're into like that side of politics, and you got to hate Disney because Disney's like this big conservative right wing behemoth that like basically imposes a capitalist American dream ideology on all of us. I mean, it goes on and on. But then it's like right now in Florida, Ron DeSantis is attacking Disney from the right, which is pretty crazy. And you get into it in the article, and it like reveals people. I'll link it in the episode description because it gets into like what a crazy history Florida has with Disney.
Yeah, so let me tell you why I did end up interested in this topic and writing the article. It's basically because I study urban planning and economic development, and I'm trying to connect a lot of dots in terms of how the state supports capitalist growth. And so I just saw the headlines about Disney's special district, and how it was being attacked by Governor Ron DeSantis, and I knew there was going to be a great story in there.
Well, can you explain what that district is? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how this actually functions. Because actually, there's a quick couple sentences in which you explain what this is. And let me read it. The RCID is what it's called. The Reedy Creek Improvement District is a powerful tool that combines Disney's corporate powers with a jurisdiction that resembles a city-state. What historian Richard Fogelsong in his 2001 book Married to the Mouse calls a kind of Vatican with mouse ears. It has independent powers to tax, spend, issue bonds, and develop unshackled by state and county regulations. It can also distribute alcohol under its own authority, police itself with a private security force that's shielded from public records laws, and has the authority, thus far unused, to build its own airport and nuclear power plant. This merger of public powers with the corporate profit motive is a natural enemy of the socialist left, but instead it's under fire from one of the rising stars of the Republican Party. And there's the contradiction, irony, whatever you want to call it, that you're locating here. It's really, to me, it's a really befuddling kind of moment because it's kind of mixing like culture war with economic stuff, right? Like, I guess that's always there, but
Yeah.
it seems like it usually goes in directions that I can kind of unpack in a coherent way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So the phenomenon of the special district is really an American creation. Um, and it's sort of a creature of necessity for local development, in part because of the way that our kind of judicial and legislative tradition are both really strict about things like state and local debt limits, and kind of and often tie the expansion of local debt to super majorities of the popular vote. So, and at the same time, there's also no federal infrastructure for rationally planning municipal development.
So essentially, Disney, and this is in the 60s at some point that Disney achieves this with for those that don't know the wider history, Disneyland opened in Anaheim, California in 1955. And Disney World was sort of the bigger dream that Walt Disney had. And there's a great YouTube video that I'll link in the episode description as well, hosted by Walt Disney in 66, I think, right before he died. And he's sort of laying out the vision of Disney World and the Florida Project, which is the name of the movie that you suggested I watch, and thank you, it traumatized me. But that that idea of the Florida Project sort of being much bigger than what happened in Los Angeles, and it requiring, it requiring a certain kind of tax district. How do they convince Florida that this is what we should do? That in other words, how do they convince Florida to let Disney have this much power in the state?
Yeah, so there are a couple of important factors from Disney's perspective and from Florida's perspective. And you've talked about this in previous episodes, how Disney kind of has this like mystical connection to the capitalist American psyche. So he kind of figures out how to wrap the legislature around his finger in order to enact his vision. But okay, so Disney World. So the main thing here is that Disneyland was a huge success, contrary to the expectations of most people. And the big limit was, the distribution of the U.S. population was pretty much weighted towards the east. People were not coming from across the country to go to Disneyland, so he wanted an East Coast version. But he also, he wanted to improve on the sort of prototype that Disneyland was. And a big problem for him was the headache of actually being in Anaheim. Disneyland kind of led to the sort of chaotic development in the immediate area. I've never been there, and I don't know what it's like now. But at least at the time, Walt was kind of bothered by sort of the junk tourism that was surrounding Disneyland and constricting further growth. He couldn't expand it if he wanted to. So Disney World, as it turned out, is actually covers 50 times the land area of Disneyland.
Jesus Lord, it is. It is land versus world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not comparable at all size wise. It's actually, and it's double the land area of Manhattan.
Wow.
If that puts it into perspective. And the way that they did that is interesting. And the land use question is really key here. And an interesting point, I picked up this book by Sharon Zukin, Landscapes of Power from Detroit to Disney World. Which I think she wrote in like 1990 or so. So she's got a good chapter about Disney World and Disneyland. And one of the anecdotes that jumped out at me was that before he developed Disneyland, Walt went to like a convention for theme park operators, and he kind of showed them his idea. And they were like, "This sucks, Walt Disney. This is never going to work." Like, it basically, there's too, you need there to be more rides. Like, actually, like, the density of rides was too low from the perspective of a standard theme park, because he was doing all of this landscaping to kind of create the Fantasia world of illusion and delight that makes Disneyland so special, right?
The architecture, like the simulacra, like that's what he's interested in. It's really, the immersive experience part of it, right? Like the idea of like building a place. Yeah, it's funny because it's the rides are one thing, but it seems like Walt had a vision that taps into that capitalist psyche you mentioned. He's like able to see like building a space. That, to me, that's part of what Disneyland and Disney World is so like compelling to me, in part because Walt succeeded in building a space that became a place people wanted to be in a really intense way, and that there's something key to understanding the appeal of capitalism in there, something like that. You know what I mean? Like he created a sort of nostalgic fantasy that is always magnetic in the imagination, and sort of understood that was beyond just rides.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he totally blindsided the theme park status quo with that vision, yeah, of basically a capitalist landscape that goes beyond the rides that you're paying for, and he went way further with Disney World, right? He said land is actually the key, so I need 43 square miles of land, and he actually sent he basically he sent people undercover to go buy the land.
That's interesting.
Yeah, this is all in that Fogelsong book that I mentioned in the
right.
article. Yeah. So because by that time the cat was out of the bag in terms of Disneyland being awesome, and if locals knew that Disney that the Disney Corporation was buying the land, they were going to sell it at theme park prices, and he wanted to buy it at current prices, which were basically dirt cheap because it was like a useless swamp.
So you're doing the old Chinatown move.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's it. So yeah, they came in with shell corporations and bought it piece by piece from local owners and basically assembled this huge territory at bargain barrel prices. So that basically he had a lot of territory to work with.
And the plan is, I mean, in that video of the plan for Epcot, it's sort of, I mean, it's much more openly and explicitly utopian. Like it's right. Like in that video, Disney comes off as a futurist. I mean, there is a direct line from him to people like Elon Musk, who are sort of like dreamers of big technological visions of what humanity could be. But Epcot is still just a theme park. Like to me, like one of the things that stuck out to me is like he's presenting this as like this is a vision of how a city could work. And you're kind of like, but it doesn't. Like nobody fucking lives there. Like you have to pay a lot of money to go inside and then leave at the end of the day. It's sort of the contradiction is intense to me.
Yeah, the Epcot video is really worth watching, and I gotta say, on one of your earlier episodes, you made a very profound point about Tomorrowland.
Oh no, what'd I say? I probably stole it from someone.
Yeah, well, I think actually you quoted Michael Eisner.
Yeah,
right. The former CEO of Disney in the like 80s and 90s. And basically what you're saying is that this kind of futurism, this bright progressive vision of whatever magnetic trains and space helmets and what have you, is kind of it kind of fell off.
Yeah.
Like it's dated, it rings hollow. So it's no coincidence, I think, that the guy we talk about, Elon Musk, is actually a total fucking clown,
right?
Who people don't respect, really.
Because he's buying into that old rocket vision that isn't quite as operative, weirdly.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it's because our capitalism is deteriorating and overcome by crisis, and and in the 60s, actually, like you could look out your window and think, oh, one day our fine country will be colonizing space and bringing democracy to the Martians, and whatever. So the Epcot vision plays with those notes for people. But it's like what it's covering, or what it's the problem that it is suggesting a solution to is the problem of the urban crisis.
Right.
Yes. So already by the mid 60s, there are these seams in the American dream, which are sort of bursting apart in places like Detroit and LA, where there, every summer at this point, there are massive disruptive riots coming from the black people in the center city.
We're not going to have that at Disneyland, though. It's going to be the happiest place on earth. It's amazing how Disney is so he's so in denial about politics at all. He even says we won't have politics in Disneyland. Like there won't be a need for it because people will be happy and they'll have all their needs taken care of. And you're sort of like, wait a second, this is some hyper communist language, in a hyper capitalist project, something like that.
That's
It's
really funny.
yeah. It's now I remember what the Eisner quote was about. It was about sort of like that the rocket ship thing was falling apart. No one gave a fuck about rocket ships or imagined that like that was the future. And instead you got this weird thing going on in Disneyland and Disney World with Tomorrowland and Frontierland and the sort of the this like rugged apocalyptic past. That's to me like why Star Wars is such a big deal in Disney culture now. It's perfect because it like gives you the rocket ship shit, but it's all cowboy stuff still. It's all couched in like the rugged individual. I don't know. There's a lot going on with Disney's sort of engagement with American history, and it seems like that is part of why your mom and others of us that were like sort of horrified by Disney are kind of like, well, they write the myths. They're the people that deliver it to us. And it's crazy to think now, like the way you're putting this too, is like they also give us a vision of city planning. Like they also give us a vision of like what a city should be, which is crazy. It's a theme park.
Yeah. Okay, so Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
There you go.
The C actually stands for community, though you would think city.
Wow.
It's some small details, right?
Yeah.
So there now is something called Epcot. Again, I've never been there. I don't really get what it is, but the vision in the video that he made was this kind of planned city, which would have not just what you got in Disney World, the rides, the pleasure, the monorail, but also an industrial center. So he was like, this is what's it a prototype for? It's a prototype for how cities in America could work better. So he read like, urban planning nerd shit like Ebenezer Howard, and so on, who had this cool little utopian book about garden cities, the garden city of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So basically Epcot was going to have industry in the center of the city, and it was going to have apartments, close to the industry for the workers, and it was going to have a green belt, and it was going to have the more pastoral suburban stuff. And that is why the special district, as I said in the article, has the power to create its own airport and its own power source, because it was not sold to the Florida legislature as a mere theme park.
It sounds more like a planned community. I mean, it sounds like it's something along the lines of the suburban tract developments and gated communities we see like all over the United States in the years after Disney does this in Florida.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the
directly inspired, I guess. Yeah.
Right. The difference being that in his in the plan in the video, he included industry. It was an integrated vision of a city in the mode that we had thought about cities in the industrial age, like with the jobs and everything.
I mean, wasn't his Disney's like direct inspiration was the Henry Ford Museum, right? And like kind of thinking like that one of the things he wanted to showcase more than anything is the industrial capacity of America. I mean, he was like, for those that don't know, Disney was involved in World's Fairs. He was part of the whole like kitchen debate thing, which is insane in 1957, or 59, which is going to the Soviet Union and sort of constructing a fake American suburban home and showing it to the commies and saying, look what we got. That to me is part of that kind of impulse, which is always about saying that America builds things better and like our industrial might is everything. I mean, it's the World War II stuff too. Like all of it connects. So it makes sense that like industry would be there, but like, is he proposing like manufacturing cars at Disney World, or what kind of industry are we talking about?
I don't know if he ever got into the details of what they would be producing.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was made up anyway. So,
right. It was never going to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, what he was trying to do was, again, it was a sales pitch.
Yeah.
And he was basically saying to Florida, to the state Senate or whatever, that You know, look at what's happening to American cities. They're stymied by poverty, and they can't solve these problems because of democracy. Right? That you can't do anything big and bold anymore
Mm.
with
Mm-hmm.
American cities. So let's try this. Let's put a corporation in charge of a city. We'll build it from the ground up, and any changes that need making, we'll just go ahead and do it by fiat. Um, that's the idea. So it's sort of a compelling authoritarian vision if you're into that sort of shit. But he was
Some on the
lying.
left would be celebrate such a thing. You know, we like the only way we're gonna get any sort of social movement is through you need a little bit of authoritarianism. Too much
Yeah,
democracy.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could
We've
get
heard the
into
pitch
it.
before. All right.
Um, yeah, I mean, so the whole thing was made up, like I said, and Vogelsong actually went into the archives and proved it. One of the cool things about his book is uh, he went into the Disney personal archives, and basically there was a memo from one of his lawyers, right? And they were trying to figure out the structure that they needed to do what they wanted. And the special district is part of the picture. Actually, the other part of the picture is creating new cities. So besides Reedy Creek Improvement District, there's also Lake Buena Vista and Bay Lake. Both are invented municipal areas, which Disney World kind of straddles, because they needed cities in order to have land use power. But so the lawyer is explaining that we need the cities for this reason, we need the special district for this reason, da da da. There's the issue of residents, and cities obviously have residents, and they'll be able to do this or that or whatever. That he talks about the residents, and Disney just went through this memo was on his desk when he died. Okay, he crossed out resident and wrote visitor/tourist.
Right.
Every instance, because he knew that the idea of building a residential city was a farce. That was not the plan.
It's funny to think that at some point Celebration, Florida is built, and there is a sort of like Disney city, where people actually live. I don't think that place has been marked as a successful sort of experiment in city planning.
No, it sucks. It sucks.
Right?
The residents, I don't know if this is still going on, but they sued Disney for basically building shitty houses and not investing in maintenance.
Oh, I believe that. I mean, let's get to that part of it, which is that, like, I don't know, the DeSantis part of it.
Yeah.
Because
let me tell you something about Celebration before we move on.
Yeah, I love Celebration. For those that don't know, Celebration is a town that was built in Florida by Disney, I think in the 90s, and became bigger in the 2000s, if I'm wrong, if I'm right. But it's like it's a town that's built on Disney principles and is like meant to be sort of a Main Street USA vision, in line with what Disney sells, as basically a place where you can live in Disneyland.
Yeah, and it was inspired by the tenets of new urbanism.
That's right.
This kind
yes.
Right, this architectural planning kind of revivalist movement.
What do you think of new urbanism? Because I mean, I don't dip into. I mean, I teach the suburbs classes, history of the suburbs, and I use this book by Dolores Hayden.
I have that book. I'm looking forward to reading it. Yeah,
Building Suburbia, which is goes through like all the phases of historical development of suburbs. But what do you think that new urbanism thing is so present in my town still? Like this sort of like they built this gigantic place called the Collection. That's like it's housing mixed with a mall. And you kind of like walk through this big outdoor landscape because it's Southern California, of big box stores. Target is there, Whole Foods, and then it's sort of like the parking lot seamlessly weaves into a parking lot that's like apartments, and condos and stuff like that. They're all built super cheap. They look like shit. They're expensive as hell. And it's sort of like if you're a person like me or you with your certain kind of like ideology goggles, I'm looking at the collection and I'm like, Jesus, man, it's just like a fucking mall that people live in, and there's something really nightmarish about that. But it totally feels like something like Celebration.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this kind of like the snake eating its tail, like, I don't know, there's like a web of mutual influence here. Like, I think that new urbanism, I don't think it could exist if not without Disney personally and Disney Corporation, certainly not without the whole kind of zeitgeist that Disney represents for us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Like, because, these architects, um, et cetera, planners are looking at the suburban landscape of the U.S. and they're saying, well, this sucks. Like, it's just like it's lifeless, et cetera. Let's do something different. And without engaging substantially with the problems of capitalism, of course, they just say, let's make the cities look more like they used to.
This is the walkable city, the walkable neighborhood,
Yeah, it's all
right?
the
There's
same
like
shit.
a
It's all the same
romantic
shit.
language around it for sure.
Yeah, the romantic. It's basically the mixed use district with a kind of nostalgic architectural style.
I'm into it though. When I hear that, I'm like, oh, that does sound cool. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't really think about the larger what you like. How is this being achieved? And then like
Right.
how it's being delivered. Honestly, is like a simulacra of that, not really that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think it's appealing on a superficial way, but like, yeah, it's a simulacrum, because like the quaint waterfront districts of the days of yore that look cool in pictures were you know uh, shitty, smelly, disease-ridden port cities,
yeah,
right? And we don't want the disease and so on, but uh, the reason why those cities existed was for the ports. And you just have like South Street Seaport, which I think was a James Rouse project. And to fill in the gaps here, James Rouse is one of these. He invented the shopping mall, so called.
this is the guy that they did the quote about Disneyland, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he spoke to some um, architects convention or something in 1963, and he said the greatest piece of urban design today in the United States is Disneyland. Um,
And you're like, how
and
can
he
that
then
be? It doesn't function. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not urban. What are you talking about?
right. The buildings like they don't really have backs. Like
Right.
they're built on mounds of dirt. They're illusions. But he was really focused on the way that people move through the space and how it stimulates their desires and makes them buy things. And he's the shopping mall guy. And
It's the
he
fucking arcades project, dude. Like,
Yeah,
it really is like, okay, this is where people are it's weird because it's like we don't live in the arcade. It's an odd sort of way of imagining it's in other words taking one piece of the like desire part of capitalism that they build these palaces of desire called arcades or malls or theme parks or whatever,
hmm
and you get to feel like, wow, this is so masterful, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work as what it says it is, and it's not something that we all. I mean, Florida Project, the movie, really captures that. Honestly, is the sort of like, here's this like magnificent park, surrounded by like motels where people who are very poor are just barely living in these motels, and it's just kind of like it sort of reinforces the notion that like none of this was meant to create a city. This is just extracting money.
yeah, and that's why I wanted you to watch that movie, because you get this feeling. You really get to see from the outside how Disney World is like this island of in saturated with wealth, um, and it has a moat around it. And then there's just basically a desolate, desperate wasteland, all around it. And those people go work at Disney World and make it function. Um, and
Yeah,
so
and not
that's
only
like,
that, but their motels are backed up to these like abandoned condo projects that are like sitting in swamps, and the kids are going like through, playing in these abandoned condos that have graffiti all over them, and they're saying things like, "Oh, I bet these were built 100 years ago," and you're like, "No, they were built like 10 years ago." Like,
2007.
yeah,
Um,
That's Florida
yeah,
in my mind, though. Like Florida to me,
yeah,
when I say like, oh, it represents American capitalism or whatever, it feels like such a lie. The fact that it's built on a swamp, there's something like poetic about it, right? Like none of it works, none of it is meant to be, and yet we kind of force it. And there it is. There's Florida.
yeah, exactly. And this is, this is going to be probably an overheated thing to say, maybe too grand of a gesture, but like, I think that exact dynamic that you see in the Florida project of, the center, um, is where all of the attention and wealth is drawn, and the surrounding area is barren. That's just like the dominant pattern of urban design in the U.S. today.
Yes.
Um, like that's gentrification. That's what this is.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
Southern California suburbs, I'm saturated in them here, and the pattern of development, the pattern of kind of the social and cultural parts of the poverty, all of it seemed very recognizable in the Florida project. It was a
yeah,
different kind of vision because it's like I was thinking about just I don't know visions of poverty in cinema, and this was like a very specific one. It wasn't urban poverty. It felt like do the right thing to me in its own way, right? Like here's a colorful vision of what people's lives are like in America, in the bright sun, and we're thinking about poverty the entire time because of sort of the landscape itself and how the people are trapped in ways that we're noticing the whole time. I don't know. I thank you for urging me to see that. That was in the back of my mind for a long time that I had to see that movie, but I kind of forgot about it. And it is a vision of Florida poverty that seems totally in line with I mean, isn't this in the Reedy Creek Improvement District? Like this movie takes place in there?
no, it's outside it. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's right. That was the point that I wanted to raise about Celebration is that, um, forget Kissimmee. Even Celebration, in order to actually build that town, they removed it from the district.
Wow. Okay.
So if you look, and I have an image of this in the article.
Hmm.
If you scroll through it, you see there's a map of the Reedy Creek Improvement District with a big hole cut out on the southern half.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
see that. Yep.
yeah, that's Celebration, and they cut it out because they were like, residents get to vote. Um,
Right. So the RCID is sort of like Disney's little fascist fiefdom,
yeah. So
where
the
there's no
city,
democracy and we do what we want and we can build a nuclear power plant if we want. Even Jesus.
yeah, get this. Okay, so the United States does not have any federal, standards for, creating a new city, municipal incorporation. It's a state by state thing, and many states, including Florida, have no minimum population. Yeah, this is totally different from how they do it in Europe. I don't want to be one of those urban planning guys who's like Europe, 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 but like they actually have fucking rules. Florida has no minimum population, so they just incorporated these two cities. To this day, Lake Buena Vista, 24 people. That's the population of Lake Buena
24
Vista.
people.
24 people.
We could know all of them.
They do know each other, yeah.
Yeah.
And Bay Lake is 29 people. So you've
Mm-hmm.
got um, a total of less than 60 residents in both cities, and they're all executives at Disney, so they vote, um, in those so-called cities, for whatever Disney wants to do. So it's a beautiful, concept if your goal is being able to make use of all of the powers granted to public entities and all of the powers granted to private entities in our fucked up, legal system.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, your piece is sort of shocking in its details of like what Disney is getting away with here. But the other part of you is sort of like thinking, well, this is Disney's example is sort of leading the way in terms of the how this country is built with no planning whatsoever. Let capital run right through it and let them build projects that then I mean the story of the suburbs like in Long Island, right? Those suburbs it's all in the Dolores Hayden. The pattern repeats itself. Like some like capitalist scumbag will create a neighborhood as like a development, And then, the people move in because they're desperate for housing, and they quickly find that like there's no services here. Like it's hard to get electricity. The water infrastructure sucks. We don't have roads. We don't have baseball fields for our kids to play in. And the fucking developer is like, well, ask the city to pay for that. Ask the taxpayers will pay for that. Basically, you pay for that, right? And so, I mean, it's a pretty common pattern in terms of capitalism pushing its external costs as much as possible onto the public. That's the name of the fucking game, all the way to Elon Musk, right? Is like make the fucking government pay for it, which is basically make the people pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that part of the Disney thing is interesting because here you have DeSantis like coming in and saying, you know what, Disney, like because you're woke moralists now, because you want to teach our kids to be transgender, we're gonna take away that special tax district. And like your piece makes clear that like DeSantis might be bluffing in terms of what he could actually do here, but it seems like a kind of signal moment in the history of Florida politics for a Republican politician to be attacking Disney and attacking the whole concept of a special tax district. You have to earn it, and you can't earn it by teaching our kids how to be gay.
Yeah. Yeah, so the whole DeSantis thing is really an interesting development. And
to say the least, yeah.
I mean, and I actually am kind of I have to do a little bit of gloating here.
Glowed up.
Because I said in the article, I said that he's not bluffing. I mean, probably. I said there's a lot of experts and so forth who reacted to the original news and said, well, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't seem like it's thought through here. And to take the most glaring example, if you totally dissolve the district, then all of the debt from the district, right? Disney could basically, like I said, issue bonds. It could also tax itself. Basically, it's creating this. It created this zone where it could issue bonds at the rate granted to public agencies, and go beyond normal municipal debt limits, right? So, if it disappeared, the poor backwards counties surrounding it would be saddled with all that debt. Orange County and Osceola County. So people looked at that and they said, well, DeSantis can't possibly go through with this. I mean, what kind of the toxic consequence of a Republican governor saddling his own constituents with a bunch of extra debt from a corporation which he wantonly attacked? Like, that makes no sense, right? So
right.
People are like, he's bound to give up on this, and drop the issue. But I said that was not likely. And indeed, since I published the article, the other shoe has fallen. And they've come out, the Florida legislature has come out with their plan to redraw the district, basically with the same powers that it has now, but with a new board. So instead of the board being appointed by quote unquote residents, aka Disney executives, it's just appointed straight by the governor. So it's a beautiful solution for DeSantis, and he basically has them checkmated as far as I can tell. Right, the district as such will continue to exist, but he's taking it over.
That's nuts. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that mean? What does that mean for Disney?
I think what it means for Disney. Oh man, I actually have this quote. Well, anyway, what it means for Disney is that they're basically whipped. And I think they said, we're not going to fight this, because they couldn't figure out, I don't think they could figure out a way to do that. So a Democratic Assembly member from Orlando, Anna Escamani, was quoted in an article. She says, "It's like Disney is operating in a low security prison where they can still do what they want to do, but there's guards around them at all times. they can't speak up against the governor ever.
Wow. So the prison bracelet on Disney. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and to me, I'm like kind of like, okay, well, what's the end game here? It seems like DeSantis is so much of what he's been doing for the last what couple years has just been like these big public red meat things for like trying to peel people off of the Trump project basically
Mm-hmm.
and attack the usual suspects. It just seems it to me it's like such a weird reversal in some ways of Disney as a kind of public figure and for politicians, right? Like it just seems like a weird reversal in the history of Florida almost in some ways, right? I mean I'm kind of like uh isn't Disney a big part of Florida's brand? And that part of it is like asking a lot of people to see Disney as the villain is what DeSantis is doing.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, so the thing that I came to realize when I was researching for this article is that Disney and Florida are essentially locked in an eternal embrace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, Disney World can't fucking go to Alabama or anything.
Right.
Right, like that. I mean, and that's like the paradox of being this kind of paragon of uh, capitalist urbanism, is, even though you've got this, Fantasia simulacrum, which is totally controlled by a corporation, and that's like kind of a wet dream for capitalism. It's still fixed in space, so it can't,
Right.
like capital in so many different contexts can say sayonara, like, we're gonna, we're going to the South, we're going to the global South. Um, thanks for trying to regulate us, we're leaving. But Disney can't do that at all, right? It's a place, it can't leave.
Mm.
So that's the perspective of Disney World, and yeah, Florida, like you said, Disney's a big part of what Florida is, and it really built Central Florida. I mean, now there's a lot of other stuff going on. You've also got Universal Studios and SeaWorld, and this kind of like, the whole place is a tourist attraction. Um, but it would be, I think, crisis for Florida, if Disney World failed.
Mm.
So yeah, so they're stuck with each other. And DeSantis, I think the reason why DeSantis changed the governance structure but didn't limit the powers of the district is because he understands that he wants Disney to continue to succeed in Florida. He just wants them to succeed on his terms. Um, I don't know if this could ultimately backfire. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you check out the news on Disney in the past year, they've got other struggles, right? They fired their new CEO and brought back the old guy. Right, Disney Plus streaming is having the same issues that all the other streaming services are having. Um, so
And I
it's
think they
like,
fired the dude. I mean, it's related to some of this like quote unquote culture war shit, right?
yeah, yeah,
Like it's like the that's what's
right. They
interesting to me is like Disney has for so long. I mean, you and I grew up with Disney as the carrier of all these like capitalist values, conservative values, and yet at the same time, I mean, Disney himself would have said, no, we're carrying like a spirit of America that's like a progressive vision of what America is.
right,
Um,
capital
that
P progress.
right, yeah, and so to me
So
the
what
idea
worries
for the
me,
idea that the idea that Disney became and evolved into like some sort of like left wing indoctrination sort of machine is crazy, and yet that's what DeSantis is going after. Like that's what DeSantis is asking us to believe.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I mean, he that I guess the right has succeeded in convincing us that colleges play that role, and that like all these different institutions, the media itself is actually a hard left communist indoctrination machine. I mean, I think Trump uses that language, right? He says like Marxism and that kind of stuff is like taken over. I mean,
I guess, yeah,
it's a fucking fantasy, and
yeah.
yet,
Well,
yeah.
so I mean, he's kind of right. He's kind of right in that, like, when he attacks Disney as being woke capitalism,
Right.
I would say the same shit, like, from the other side. Like, and so it turns out that Disney's relationship to like the queer community, and this is not something that I'm very well read on, sort of have a superficial understanding, but I read a little bit about it. Basically, Disney World uh, has been courting gay people since like the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
And in its
First,
animation staff as well. And there's a whole history there of artists. Yeah.
yeah, and then they've been doing this kind of. It started off as sort of a winking thing, like just putting up little symbols that, that were recognizable as gay to those in the know. And now they have all of these big, um, like events for gay adults, like mixers and so on. Um, and you could kind of see it as part of a, again, not the expert here, but as part of a larger capitalist project to kind of tame queerness, to bring it into the corporate mainstream. Right. So that's woke capitalism. Like,
Right.
DeSantis is right, man.
Right. And all of the complexity that entails. I mean, I was grown, growing up, I heard that stuff. I heard that like Disney was friendly to gay people, and that as a young person, with a certain set of values, was very appealing. And that's part of why I think the Disney Corporation is one to watch, because they are adept at like playing these streams in American culture to their advantage, right? They are in a lot of ways a vision of what American culture ought to be, as envisioned as a capitalist culture. In other words, they do play that role of like propagandists for a certain vision of how things ought to be. And I mean, in that sense, they function as a Rorschach test for America, because if you look at Main Street USA and Disneyland, and you're filled with warmth, which I am. I'm like, oh my God, this is such a nostalgic, beautiful vision of what life could be. This sort of like strolling the streets together, going into these little boutiques and shops, and we're all singing carols. And it is I think what's so fucked up about it and sad is that Disneyland sells you the shit you can't get in American society because of capitalism, right? Like Disneyland sells you that sort of warm vision of a collective, and then like tells you to leave at the end of the day. Like there's something sadistic about it, because they create a vision that people want, and yet it's sort of a fleeting one. It's one that like you're just sort of like you pay for, and then you go back to the shitty world that Disneyland actually made.
Yeah, right. And if you were actually going to live there, it would fall apart and suck, like Celebration.
I'm a kid that dreamed of living at Disneyland when I was a kid. Like I think I wrote a poem in like 5th grade about how my dream would be to live at Disneyland. And I'm kind of like, now I think back at that and I'm like, wow, how deeply the corporation like saturated itself into my mind there.
Yeah, they really got you. Now, but the thing that kind of gives me hope is that it's not actually possible to live at Disneyland.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It's because like, because
the tragedy of my life, dude, is like, and now I'm just bitter.
But like everyone else along the line, who like Walt himself, whoever was in charge when they built Celebration, they knew that the vision is just not compatible with democracy. And that the people who line up to live in Disneyland ultimately can't physically be brainwashed enough to actually live their lives there without causing trouble. So that's what I'm saying. It gives me hope, because like people are not just gonna ultimately not gonna continue in their adoring of Disney once the roof leaks and the school sucks.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to hear more about the new urbanism thing and how that fits in, because I think of you as someone, Avi, that sort of tapped into how people are thinking about housing today, right? Especially like how the left is thinking about housing today. Where does new urbanism fit into that at all? Is it just a design principle? Is it something that seems like it's old-fashioned and no one talks about new urbanism anymore? Or what's the conversation? Because it seems like I do see a lot of people on Twitter and other social media like talking about the walkable city and still kind of in that mode of hating American suburbs because of the way they're designed and how fucking depressing they are. In other words, the issues that I grew up with of living in an alienated place where there was nowhere to walk are still like issues that people seem to bring up, especially on the left.
Yeah. Um, that's interesting. It's an interesting question. New urbanism is a movement from the 90s. And I think of it as being kind of dated, but actually your comment makes me think it really is a very influential movement, because it's true. A lot of people, I wouldn't really say they're on the left, but well, a lot of people are drawn to this vision of the city, the walkable city, the 15-minute city. I don't know if you've heard that one.
Oh yeah,
Um, um, which is a pretty new urbanist vision. Um, and it's kind of saying, yeah, let's go back to downtown, and do it differently this time.
and it's a big.
Um,
It's the critique is big on identifying cars as the problem.
yeah. Um, and there's definitely truth to the critique of the suburbs.
Hmm.
Meaning, yeah, like, the suburbs do suck. They, I mean, your comment about their kind of fundamental unfinished nature, right? The private developers come in, make the money, don't actually build a place and get out. That is a really interesting perspective on the suburbs. And we all, we know the suburbs are only possible because of federal funding for highways, and it's kind of like, we tamed the frontier and suburbanized it.
Right.
Um,
And now we
and
kind of, it feels like there's a peel back from that. I mean, in cities like, I mean, I think they're still doing it in New York. I mean, there was, there's like, they closed the street in certain blocks, right, in Manhattan, and they're probably doing this in Brooklyn too, where they like sort of
mhm,
made areas where people were walking. I mean, just
mhm,
just like over the holidays, I feel like they closed Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and had
mhm.
people walking, and I saw all these like, I don't know, little trend pieces that were talking about how cool it was that like you could walk on the street and like how refreshing that it falls into all this romantic. You've heard all this romantic talk about this, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh man, it's nostalgic too. It totally is like
it
this
is.
must be how it used to be.
It is, and there, I don't know if you get into Twitter and I guess some of the Facebook groups. I mean, people post these nostalgic images of like, urban downtowns from 100, 130 years ago that look quaint and inviting, and they're like, what happened? Oh, it got paved over for a highway and a parking lot. Like, and that's all good. I mean,
I'm like, are
it,
they wrong?
it's all good insofar as you should critique the federal highway funding, and so on. And it's not like those guys are losing now. I mean, like, even today, the IRA, right? Like, Biden's infrastructure act also is totally weighted towards highways, and you can't pass an infrastructure bill through, Congress that has like a less than 80% of the proportion of transit infrastructure weighted towards highways. That's still the world we live in. So I
So
don't want to
weird.
go. I don't want to go so far in the other direction with my critique that I'm actually supporting that status quo. But
You don't want
um
to be the Jane Jacobs, is what you're saying.
uh yeah,
Because
yeah.
I say that because in my mind, and again, I have somewhat of surface level understanding. I've read parts of the Power Broker though, but like
Mhm.
in the history of New York City, right? Like that big like, isn't there a fucking bad Broadway play about it right now?
Yeah,
About like
there is.
Robert Moses versus Jane Jacobs and the building of these highways in New York City, and a lot, that's a history. Moving to New York City when I was in my 20s going to graduate school, I was just told that story again and again and again of like, well, the highways were built, they destroyed the South Bronx, that's why we have hip hop now. It's a pretty standard narrative. And the villain is like Moses and building big highways and bringing cars into the city. Like
Yeah.
that's what seems to be a pretty, like,
Okay.
I don't know, consensus kind of starting point for a lot of people. I know there are other viewpoints.
Yeah. Oh, so let me try to wrap up the kind of left critique of Jacobs and new urbanism into one
I love it. That's what I want to do.
because they're kind of in a lineage together.
Totally, yeah.
So yeah, Jane Jacobs was living in the West Village. She was a homeowner in the West Village, which was then a working class area. So she herself was not a worker, I don't think. And she was really taken with the vibrancy of her street. I forget now the exact phrase, but she wrote about the dance of the sidewalk. I think that is the exact phrase. Basically just people moving around and interacting with each other, and she liked how it was really intimate and intimate but not intimate. Like, they're not your friends, but they are your people. They're your neighborhood, and people look out for each other. You've got the eyes on the street that sort of make it like a safe place to be because people are using the street at all hours a day. Right. So she wrote about that with no class analysis. Okay. Fast forward to now, I'm not saying she did it personally, but like the West Village is a fucking bourgeois gentrified hellhole. I mean, the people are not using the street in the same way that they were.
Well, it's a Disneyland kind of, right?
Yes.
I mean, in a lot of ways that that word came up in a lot of literature about the gentrification of New York City in the last many decades has been like the Disneyfication of Times Square, Disneyfication.
Yes. Well,
yeah, and it seems like it fits into that in every way that you and I are talking about.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a tangent. Let me say it, and then if I forget, remind me to talk about cars again.
We'll come back to the cars. All right.
A piece that I found in doing the research for the article, which really blew my mind, was a New York Magazine piece by an architect named Peter Blake from 1972 about Disney. Disney World was only a few years old. And he's like, this is amazing. Basically the same thing as James Rouse. Like, cities today, they can't do what Disney is doing. If you look at it, it's exactly what we want. It's written in this kind of semi-joking tone. Like, so, he can kind of backtrack and say like, oh, I'm like joshing you. But that he actually says in the article, if we wanted to make Manhattan good again, if we wanted to make it fun, he was also kind of aping Mayor Lindsay, who was sort of roundly mocked for using the phrase "fun city." I still think it's a fun city. He said if we wanted to actually make fun city, we would give Manhattan to Disney and let them do it.
Jesus Christ.
Which is like it's like a joke for him, but like then that happened, right? Like actually, Times Square was literally Disneyfied. Like, I mean, the Urban Economic Development Corporation they leased a bunch of Times Square land to Disney to do Disney shit, and they evicted all.
I remember reading a piece about Times Square that put it really well. It said something along the lines of like, who could have anticipated that the like real rain that would come to wash the filth off the streets that Travis Bickle fantasized about in Taxi Driver in 1976? Who could have imagined that real rain would be the Disney Corporation?
Yeah, man. That's it. Disney is Travis Bickle with a smile and mouse ears.
Ooh, beautiful. I love it.
So that's just like, it's an incredible thing. Is that like just 25 years later, they literally did give Times Square over to Disney.
And the city became, I mean, we're doing a Mr. Show thing on Nostalgia Trap. We're talking about this 90s sketch comedy show, Mr. Show. And they did like a sketch called The New San Francisco, and it's in the 90s. And it's a gentrification sketch. And it's literally just like about like selling San Francisco as this sort of Disney-fied version of San Francisco. And it feels like that's what like we live in, like, village land, in the West Village and that sort of thing, in the sense that it's a simulacra in which people are invited to visit. Just like Disneyland, they're invited to visit. Nobody lives there. The people that do live there are maybe like really rich or billionaires that own apartments that they don't live in. I mean, there's a strange emptiness to the village. Like, it's disturbing, and it is exactly Disneyland. I mean, you watch the Florida Project, you're like, oh, fucking Florida, that's crazy. That's how it is down there. And you're like, no, this register exists in every American city, and every American city is sort of part of that trend of creating a fake castle for rich people.
So Florida Project. let's bring it back to that, because I think the Florida Project is kind of an interesting lens from which to look at the political problems of new urbanism.
Mm.
Okay, because I think the new urbanist movement, such as it is kind of hitting a wall on politics. And I think there's a reason for that. So if you look at New York City today, this is a little bit inside baseball in terms of local politics, but there's supposed to be a congestion pricing plan being implemented. So what that's supposed to do is basically, if you're driving into the urban core, right, south of 60th Street in Manhattan, they're gonna, you know, they're gonna charge you a pretty hefty amount.
Right.
And there are two goals there. Number one, limit traffic. Number two, raise money for the MTA. Now, the implementation is getting all tripped up, and it might never happen. And I think there is kind of a populist anti-congestion pricing block, which has conservative elements for sure, but also I think is not what congestion pricing advocates would caricature it to be. And here's the problem. I mean, if you look at the statistics, you look at the demographics of drivers in New York, yeah, it's disproportionately wealthy. If you're driving in New York, you're more likely to be white and upper class. But it's not exclusively that. And obviously, if you live in an outer borough and your grandma lives in another outer borough, you probably drive. Okay. If you live in Jersey and work in Brooklyn, you probably drive, right?
Or you take a long train ride.
Yeah.
And connect to buses and shit like that. I mean, it's what we lived in Sunset Park. My wife worked in Long Island City, Queens, and she did not drive. She wished she could drive, but we were just train people. We didn't have a car. And, her commute slowly went from like an hour and 10 minutes to an hour and 50. Like the service got worse over the years that she was at LaGuardia. And it became like an hour and a half each way. And we start to be like, this is quality of life shit. And we're like, how can this be? Like, you look at the fucking map and you're like, these two things aren't far away. How can this city be so, after all these years, be so fucking impossible to get around? Like the commute times in New York are some of the worst in America, as I understand it.
It's probably true. And I mean, if you're a congestion pricing advocate, you say, yeah, and the reason why we're doing congestion pricing is to bring in a new revenue stream for the MTA so that they can reverse the deterioration in service. And that's a good idea. But I just think that, like, working class people in the outer boroughs, or the edges of the metro area, we should say, including Jersey, Westchester, what have you, right, the inner ring suburbs, which are increasingly diverse and poor, they look at the new urbanist vision and they don't see themselves as being a part of it. That's the Florida Project dynamic.
It's somewhere else. Like you create new urbanist, like, sort of pockets.
Yeah, pockets. It's uneven. And so,
that exist as theme parks, dude.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I was just watching The Wire, rewatching that show, a show about fucking and influential, I think, on like a discussion of urban politics, honestly. But like, there's a scene where one of the dudes, it's like one of the drug dealers, takes his girlfriend to a fancy restaurant on the side of Baltimore where all the rich white people live, and they're very conscious about it, and they feel like visitors. And he says, we're allowed to come here because she's his girlfriend is saying, it's okay, we can spend our money. There are black people here, we're allowed to be here. And he says, yeah, but like, we're going to spend our money at this restaurant. We're going to walk around the harbor and all the cute shops, and then we're going to go back to our fucked up neighborhood. And that's just how it works. And it seems like that's Florida Project. That's a new urbanist vision.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jane Jacobs. Fuck you.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and
Which
then
is weird to say because she's been like Jane Jacobs. Like that to me, like if you're around left circles or liberal circles, Jane Jacobs is like a name that's like she like kind of she put the pole down and said, no, you are not going to destroy this beautiful little village community here with your big giant capitalist highway. And it seems like
yeah,
that narrative draws people in, obviously.
yeah, but that's the double bond of capitalist urbanism is that of de-investment and reinvestment,
Right.
disinvestment, I should say, right? If you're you basically the platter of options is capital ignores you and you get potholes and fucking crime and poverty, um, lead in the water, um, or you get the interest of capital and they come in and make your little strip of urban territory an Epcot style Fantasia, and you get priced out. So that's new urbanism is not trying to solve that problem.
Well, because it has nothing. I mean, new urbanism seems exactly like the Florida project. I mean, the Disney project that you describe. In that it's not serious as a community building project. It's sort of an aesthetic turn, a design turn, a nostalgic turn. But it's not one that says like this is how we're going to address the problems of the city as described in something like The Wire, and we're going to actually take that bureaucracy that serves capital apart and create structures and rules that build a city that would actually function for everybody. That's not what new urbanism promises. New urbanism promises a cool downtown to go visit.
Exactly, and that's why it's so picturesque.
It's not even a cool downtown, honestly, though. That's the thing. Is like it just gets cheaper and cheaper. Disneyland is good at it. Like Disneyland is like he has a special skill. And I say he, but him and his design team had a special skill at this that for whatever reason, like we said, locked onto a certain kind of nostalgic mood. People fucking dig this shit. I mean, not everybody. There's a lot of hippie anarchist moms that don't let their kids engage with Disney. I know that. But there's also, I guess, a growing like right-wing movement that doesn't let their kids look at Disney either because Ron DeSantis says it's like gay shit. I mean,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's Disney is like the fucking dialectical machine in a lot of ways, like there's so much there. I'm surprised more people haven't written about it, honestly.
Yeah. It is really interesting, and it is kind of it's a sad story. It's like if you like step back and look at the big picture here, like my article is basically about like two like two entities, capitalist political entities of nostalgia, like just like duking it out. It's like different brands of nostalgia. Like you've got the Disney woke capitalist nostalgic Main Street USA, and then you've got the further right wing straight white nuclear family Ron DeSantis style nostalgia.
Right.
It's just like that's where it's going on. That's the front. That's where the fight is.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense too. It's like you're gonna fight out over like cultural products. And those would be like that would kind of be the interface through which like we take out all these different maybe deeper ideological divisions, racial divisions, sexual divisions, all through like the movies we watch and the TV we consume and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I thought Florida Project was great. I was reading an interview with the director Sean Baker, I want to say his name is. And he was talking about like it was interesting because there was a little nostalgia in the way he was talking about what he wanted to give to people, which was a sort of Little Rascals vibe, the sort of our gang stuff. Like I grew up because I'm a certain age. I grew up with the 1930s on TV, which is weird to say. Like in the 1980s, like fucking our gang was on TV all the time, and so like I grew up with that sort of vision of like these plucky kids sort of making a life out of like being surrounded by poverty. I mean, it's the Great Depression. And it seems like Florida Project was sort of in that mode. And he says he wanted to make it that way, in part, like sort of show like the life of kids in this kind of world. But in a lot of ways, it's a sort of like I don't know. It's a survival vision within the landscape we're describing in some ways. And that part of it was a different vision than what I expected. Like that, like Florida Project isn't just like hitting you over the head with like this is how this is the brutal reality. Instead, it's looking for like a kind of like everydayness of how people live. And for those that haven't seen it, I mean, it's about people who are living in motels outside of the Magic Kingdom, and you really feel the class inequality yet, but it's not sort of pounded into you, if you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Really interesting movie. This might be going a bit far afield from our core themes, but and you're talking about Florida Project, and what's coming back to me is the figure of the character played by Willem Dafoe,
Yeah.
um,
Who
who is this
manages the hotel? Yeah.
really contradictory and ambiguous position, right? He's the manager of the motel, so he's kind of like the landlord. Um, I mean, he actually has to evict everyone every 30 days to keep them from gaining the rights of the residents.
It's incredible, all
Um,
of that. Yeah.
but like he's not the bad guy at all. He's actually very sympathetic, I thought. And he kind of has this position of like the dad of the complex. Like he looks after the kids and he kind of mediates different conflicts between neighbors. Um, it it's very interesting how um, he's in sort of the position of the villain, but also like a small time villain, but also like really is a big part of the social cohesion,
Yeah.
such as it exists.
Yeah. I mean, he's the one sort of like thing that's holding a lot of it together in a lot of weird ways. Yeah, the movie made me think a lot, and it really made me think a lot about your piece, in part because it's a depiction of a world that is all kind of made possible by this park being there. But the people that we see are not the people who are enjoying the park or building the park. Instead, we're seeing this sort of the externality. We're seeing the people who are living on the outskirts of the fiefdom, right? And it seems in the same way you could make this movie about people in the outer boroughs of New York City, right? And that there is an Oz somewhere, and it's right there, and you're benefiting from it. And she's, the way that they show this mother, this single mom, like sort of going and trying to sell fake perfume to the tourists. There's an idea that there is like that the park is this generator of wealth. They are the ones that like are kind of, and yet we're there. It's also like creating this sort of parasitic class of people who are surviving by being parasites on the tourists, even like ripping them off sometimes and that sort of thing. I mean, to me, it's weird because of reading the interview with Sean Baker, I really wanted to know how they shot the ending, because the ending actually takes you into fucking Disney World. And I was like, wait a second, how they
Oh,
do this?
I actually read about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think they
Yeah.
did it. I think they did it without permission. I think they just brought their phone.
Yeah, totally. They did it guerrilla style, and he says, it's not illegal. It's just against the rules. We bought tickets for them. We went in, filmed it that way. And to me, like, I'm not spoiling anything because this isn't really a narrative movie, but like that ending of these little girls running into Disneyland was such a fucking gut punch. And then just ripped to black credits, silent black credits. I was left with just, what do I feel about that? And it was a tangle of emotions because those little girls are experiencing such like unbridled joy and escape as they go into this place. They finally get to like the Oz that you haven't seen the whole time. You've kind of felt the whole time. And it's a brilliant movie. And it really kind of, to me, like, yeah, it picks up on a lot of that like external shit. I thought it was kind of a hit at Disney, but Sean Baker in his interviews was like, no. We were just kind of like, we're just sort of using Disney as a sort of interface here.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I mean, that's funny. If he doesn't see it that way.
I did.
Because
I felt very dark about Disney at the end, but that's just the way.
again, if you have the context, if you learn about Reedy Creek, like the Disney used the Reedy Creek Improvement District to get first come first serve access to private activity bonds apportioned by the federal government to the state that were supposed to be for affordable housing. They got them first and used them to build hotels. That's literally what happened.
They ripped the mask off and said, just kidding. We're not building houses. We're building fucking Disney World.
Yeah. We're building hotels for Disney World in particular. In this case, this was in the 80s. Yeah. So
It reminds me of Elon Musk being like, we're all going to move to Mars. And like, who the fuck believes that, dude? Like, even if you ever succeeded in building a colony on Mars, which I don't think we'll ever see in our lifetime, I know who's living there, and it ain't me, you know, and it ain't anybody who lives around here.
Yeah, I don't think we need to worry about Mars.
At some point, will there be a Disney park on Mars? That's the question. Will there be an RCID on Mars? It's funny because all that like intergalactic exploration is just more frontier, right? Like it just seems like it's just more of that. Avi, this was fun. I appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna include all these articles and things we've brought up. I feel like we mentioned a lot of different books and writers in our talk just now, so I want to make sure everyone has that stuff to look at. And I will point people to your work. Thank you so much for talking Disney with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me on and for doing all of this. This is really good.
Well, okay, my friends, I think that's going to do it for Nostalgia Trap today. I want to thank my guest, Avi Garelick. Always great to catch up with Avi. Go check out all of his stuff on Disney. I will link all of it in the episode description. I also want to thank him for finally making me watch Florida Project. That's a film that I really enjoyed and I'll be thinking about for a long time. So check all that stuff out. And if you want to hear more about the weird, wacky, wonderful, often terrifying history of the Walt Disney Corporation, I've got a whole series of videos and podcasts about that up on the Patreon, patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. That link will also be in the episode description. That series is something I've been working on a lot for the last couple of years. So if you want to check that out, I appreciate it. I'd love to hear what you think. All right, take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.